In today's video, I'm going to be reading 5 true haunted house stories. But before we begin, hit that like and subscribe to hear more spooky stories. When I was a kid, I lived in a one-story house with my dad, my older sister, and my stepmom. It was a nice and quiet place. We had hardwood floors and there was a hallway leading from the living room into where the bedrooms were. It was a rather dark hallway which turned to the left and led to a guest room in my parents' bedroom. It was dark since there was just a single dim light on the ceiling between the 2 bathrooms and the second bedroom, which was at the end of the hallway before it turned left. There was also an attic right above the master bedroom's door. We never really opened it. It's weird, it just didn't feel like we had permission to, even though we did and could use it at any time. I can recall one day after school I returned home to the house being empty. My sister was at a friend's house and my parents went out to try and surprise us with McDonald's before we came back home. I remember calling out my sister's name to see if she was home, as well as my mom and dad's name. Without anyone responding, I went into my parents' room where they had a computer. I sat down and turned it on, hoping to get a few minutes of gaming in before my parents came back. As I sat there, the room felt like it was getting darker, but I told myself that my eyes were just adjusting to the computer monitor in front of me. The computer was taking a rather long time to turn on. I was maybe 10 years old at the time. I looked around the room to see if my eyes could adjust, and it started to feel colder and colder. But my eyes didn't adjust, and even though the light was on and the windows were open, it was still extremely dark. That's when I looked up to see if the light was still on. When I looked up, the ceiling was completely black, and the darkness shrouded the light above me like a thick black haze. Immediately I looked back at the computer to compose myself and I ignored it, and I told myself that I was just a kid that was creeped out. As I focused on the monitor, the room was cold and quiet. Suddenly a woman's voice whispered shortly and sternly my name. I could feel the wind on my ear and the pressure of someone holding my shoulder. I bolted out of the bedroom and moments later, my dad came through the front door, smiling and holding a kid's meal in his hand and asking me how my day at school went. I didn't tell him what just happened. Some time passed, and my dad began having his own experiences in the house. Sometimes he would fall asleep watching his favorite TV shows on the sofa. In the middle of the night, when we had all fallen asleep, he would wake up and hear footsteps around the living room, and he would also hear chains being dragged across the floor. At the time, we also had a dog. He said that our dog would follow the sound of the footsteps, and that was how he knew he wasn't imagining it. The footsteps would lead into the kitchen, pausing for a moment before something dropped from the kitchen counter. Sometimes when one of us was alone in the house, we would hear little girls giggling and laughing in the bathroom at the end of the hall. I also remember my dad talking in a serious tone. My dad said that he would hear a knock on the door, but there wouldn't be a reply. He could see the shadows of 2 people from underneath the door. It would reflect off of our hardwood floors. My dad would open the door after no reply and no one would be inside. He would then notice he was alone in the house. This was a common incident that many of us had experienced ourselves. My stepmom didn't like children, but she hid it very well from my dad. When he would leave for work, he would work 15 to 20-hour shifts, but he always smiled when he came home and saw us after work. Sometimes my stepmom would put me in the basement and said if I couldn't behave myself like a person, I would be treated like an animal. She also had these wooden paddles that she would duct tape together and hit us with. She broke these paddles on numerous occasions. Each time I counted and noticed that at the 13th time I couldn't feel anything anymore. So if she hit me 80 times like she sometimes would, then it wouldn't be so bad. This came in handy for whenever I was scared of anything that happened in the house. She also had us eat dog food and drink our dog's water dish. The thing about being downstairs is that she would turn off the lights so you would be downstairs and it was completely black. It would feel like that room at the other corner of the basement was staring at me, and I felt like something was slowly creeping closer and closer to the corner of the basement where I was sitting. Sometimes I would hear feet dragging in the distance, accompanied by tapping sounds similar to fingernails tapping on a concrete floor. This only happened soon after the sun had set, and the basement was once again too dark to even see my hand waving in front of my face. As the sounds came closer and closer on the damp basement floor, the cement walls offered protection from it, and I would simply hug my legs in a fetal position. At that point I would sing a song from Anastasia, Dancing Bears, Painted Wings. My sister and I used to sing that song together, and hearing my voice made me feel less alone in that situation. Even as I felt the air thicken and the feeling of something weighing in next to me, waiting for me to open my eyes and take a look, each time that I did manage to open my eyes in an attempt to see what it would still be so dark that I didn't know if something was there or not. I learned how to toughen up and deal with that thing by treating it like a bully. Just don't let it get to you. Don't let it bother you, I would tell myself. But the utter relief of the light turning on and being allowed to come back upstairs and watching my dad pull in the driveway was the best feeling in the world at that time. Another one of my stepmom's favorite punishments would once again be in the basement. She would have my sister and I fold the clothes in the laundry machine. She would later tell one of us to go upstairs and then proceeded to throw all of the clothes on the ground, and she would tell one of us to fold it again by ourselves. Downstairs, my sister and I knew that there was something not right with it. The room downstairs had a TV and a small dusty sofa. The door would always be open and it always felt like someone or something wanted you to come inside. It was almost magnetic. At times we would have to go into the basement room whenever my stepmom had her friends over. We had to be quiet downstairs without a peep or else she would get upset. Due to the giggling ghosts who were upstairs, we always took the blame for it and were punished according to her mood. When I was 12 or so, 2 of my dad's brothers moved into the house from the recession. One of my uncles slept in the guest room while our other uncle slept in the basement room. Sometimes we would go downstairs to see if my uncle was hungry. When we entered the room, my uncle would be laying on the sofa with his eyes open and not blinking and unresponsive. This would go on for a good hour or so. My dad said there wasn't anything downstairs, but he rarely went downstairs. My uncle said there was something evil and that it was trying to get into his body. My other uncle, who slept in the guest bedroom, said he was asleep and had a dream where a Confederate soldier kept screaming without eyes. He said, "They took my eyes, they took my eyes." He woke up to see a floating orb of light in front of his face. I remember one night as my sister and I were falling asleep, my dad kept yelling down the hall from the living room for us to stop talking and to go to sleep. He said it a few more times before my sister and I said we weren't talking. My dad then turned off the hallway light and said goodnight. Moments later, I opened my eyes and behind our bedroom door was a little girl in old pajamas. She had long black hair and nearly blended in with the shadows. I stared at her and then covered my head with my blanket. At one point, 2 of my cousins moved in after my uncles moved out. They had our old bedroom and my sister and I took the guest bedroom. My cousins were both boys and we were supposed to help them get used to living with us. They kept fighting with each other. The youngest one would climb into my bed in the middle of the night because he didn't want to fight with his older brother. We had a lock on our bedroom door and that made him feel safer. Also, he did mention that the bedroom scared him, but I didn't ask why. Eventually, the oldest one started to walk around the house at night. He would grab and hoard the knives. We found makeshift weapons like a stick with sharp rocks on it and a strong thread with something sharp on it. He said he was going to kill our stepmother and everyone in the house. He was just 12 or 13 at the time, and eventually law enforcement became involved and he was deemed insane. Once my dad found out about my stepmother's abuse, he divorced her swiftly and we moved. We never saw her again. One thing I remember is while we were moving out, the landlord stopped by and baked us all cookies. My dad asked them if anyone died in the house. The landlords were shocked and said yes, there was an older lady who died from depression upstairs in the attic. Then they asked how my dad knew. He then told them about our experiences. Our landlords also mentioned that the house was built on an old battleground. To this day, sometimes I drive past the house and think about knocking on the tenant's door. I've had a few strange encounters, but the one that really sticks with me is this one. A few years ago, I lived in a small village on the Cheshire-Staffordshire border in the UK. We were incomers and bought the brand new property. For a few months, everything was normal until my next-door neighbor excavated their garden, trying to level the very steep plot. The workmen uncovered the entrance to a stone tunnel leading away into the hillside. Then strange things started to happen in my house. It started with the upstairs bathroom, which was the room closest and at the same level with the entrance to the next-door tunnel. I had been gifted a set of plaster seashells. These things were large and heavy, weighing about a pound apiece, and they had little wire hoops to enable them to be hung on the walls. I was alone when I heard a thud from upstairs. 3 or 4 of the shells had come off the wall. Shoddy DIY skills, I thought, except one of the shells was across the room and tucked neatly and unbroken behind the toilet cistern, some 10 feet away. I had no explanation, but being practical and unflappably English, I thought there must be one, and dutifully hung all the shells back on the wall and carried on. A few days later, I was getting ready for work. My son was already at school and my husband left for work some hours before. I showered and changed into my uniform, but when I left my bedroom, I could hear voices. The volume was so low that I couldn't make out the words, but there's definitely a pattern, like a distant conversation. My son was very young at the time, so I figured he left the TV on somewhere. So I checked. Nothing was on. No TV or radio. Windows are all closed and locked, so it's not music from a passing car. And the neighbor's workmen haven't arrived for the day, so it's not them that I can hear. I even go outside, but I don't hear anything outside. Again, no explanation, but there could be. My husband is firmly a skeptic, so I don't panic, and I don't call him and beg him to come home, which is what I wanted to do. I'm thinking someone might have got into the house, but I had to unlock all the doors myself to check inside. I even checked the garage in case someone had snuck in that way. I'm telling myself it's voices being carried on the wind, echoes sounding off the buildings. I'm truly freaked out. My heart is pounding and I'm shaking, but I'm a grown-up and I go back inside, into the kitchen that had been a place of calm and peace just seconds before. In the 30 seconds or so I've been outside, every cupboard and drawer in the kitchen is open. Some wide open, some just a crack, but every single one is open as if someone was curious to see what was in there. I was understandably freaked out. I slammed everything shut and fled. A few days later, the neighbors decided the cool stone tunnel was too unstable to keep as a feature and the tunnel was filled back. Nothing ever overtly happened in that house again. Except a few weeks later, I was chatting to the neighbors over the fence and I complimented them on their new garden design and he laughed. He said that although the tunnel would have been cool, the several ghosts that had parades through his house of it were too much to handle. Apparently that tiny, virtually no-name village had been the site of a major battle during the War of the Roses. Queen Margaret had watched the battle from the local church, and whilst the fields and streams close by had run red with the blood of her soldiers, she had the shoes of her horse turn around and escaped, killing the blacksmith in the process so he couldn't tell what she had done. I don't know if that small hand-dug tunnel had been an escape route for the Queen. I'm a skeptic on so many paranormal stories as I have absolutely no proof, but it really did happen to me and I still don't have an explanation. When I was about 9, I lived in this old farmhouse with my 2 parents and my 2 older brothers. Me being the youngest and the only girl, my parents never believed me when I told them I saw shadows in the bedroom at night or I heard my name being called. They told me I had an overactive imagination, but I know what I saw and felt as a kid and it was nothing I could have made up on my own. There was one night I remember most of all. I was sleeping in our living room or my parents' room because of the things I saw and heard in my bedroom. When I did sleep in my room, I wouldn't last the night there. But this night, my dad told me I needed to sleep in my own room. I was in my bed and nothing happened, so I soon fell asleep, until I heard my name in my ear. It was a woman's voice, and at first I thought it could have been my mom telling me I could sleep in her bed. So I started to sit up, when the blanket on my bed ripped off of me and went across my room. I was used to hearing things and seeing things I couldn't explain, but never had anything tried to be so physical with me. As a little girl, I was frozen in fear. I was so scared I thought I had just closed my eyes and didn't move, it would leave me alone. But boy was I wrong. I was trembling so bad and I remember trying to hold my breath so I wouldn't make a noise to upset whatever was in my room. That's when I heard a loud pitched scream in my ears. And then I felt 2 hands on my shoulders push me down into my pillows. At this point, with me being held down and the high-pitched screaming in my ears, I guess my fight or flight response kicked in and I started screaming and kicking. It didn't take long for my lights to turn on and for my whole house to be in my bedroom. But before they came in, I felt the pressure let go of my shoulders and then I had a burning feeling on my forehead. My mom held me as I cried and took me into her bedroom as my father took my brothers and put them back into their beds. My mother told me she never saw me so scared before, and that was the moment she knew I was not lying to her. That and the fact I had a big scratch on my forehead, as if someone put their nail above one side of my face and quickly whipped the nail to the other side. To this day, I can't drive by that house without feeling like I'm being watched. I have more stories about that house, but this one really sticks out to me because it was the first time I felt completely helpless. When I was in college years later, I made a really close friend with a medium. She told me that I also have a gift, and that's why I was targeted as a child. Also, to point out, we had a river in our backyard, and some people believe spirits travel alongside the water. I'm happily living on my own now, but I do plan on going back sometime soon with my friend to see if she can pick up on any of the energy I felt there as a kid. When I was about 5 or 6, I lived in New York. We lived in this old, small 2-story house. It was a bad house. The landlord was horrible and made us pay to fix things that were his job. Anyway, the house always creeped me out. The basement had black mold and black windows and other spiders. There were rats there as well. We always had a feeling the house was haunted. Every night at exactly 10, you could hear walking up the stairs. This always happened and we got used to it, thinking the house was just setting. One night, my brother and I were sleeping in my older sister's room with her. We stayed up late watching movies and TV shows, and out of nowhere, the shower turned on. The shower was on for about 10 minutes before my sister decided to turn it off. She turned it off and we thought it was a plumbing issue. When she was coming back, a stool on the door slid across the bathroom floor. Not too long ago, my mom told me an old couple used to live there. Sadly, they both passed away in the house. The creepiest thing about the house was the attic. It was literally chained closed and the landlord would never open it. I'm currently living in Australia, and this all started when I moved into my current house around 3 years ago. In my culture, we believe that whenever a family moves into a new home, a priest should come to perform various prayers to bless the house. However, when my mom bought the house, we immediately went on holiday for 3 months, so we were unable to perform the rituals. Everything started when we first came back to our house. Just some background, my mom raised me on her own, so it was just the two of us staying in the house at the time. I was still in high school and my mom worked in the city, so we both took the train every morning. My mom always left the home earlier than me, so it was my job to lock up every morning. My mom worked late almost every day, so I would get home first and be home alone for at least 5 hours every day. One morning as I left home, I began to feel paranoid that I had not locked the door, so I walked back to check it. The door was locked. Later that day, when I came home from school, I walked up my driveway to find that the door was wide open. I freaked out, but I was brave enough to go inside. Our kitchen is pretty close to the entrance, so I grabbed a knife and searched the entire house. There was no one there. I decided to not tell my mom because she was really stressed with work and I didn't want to freak her out. Over the next few days, another strange thing started happening. Our garage door would start randomly opening whenever we were home. My mom was kind of scared, but then we thought maybe our neighbor's garage remote functioned the same frequency or something, and it was activating our door too, so we dismissed it. It had been 2 months since we were living in our new house, and everything seemed to be normal again, until one day when I was awoken in the middle of the night by my mom. She looked super scared and asked me if I had come to her room to wake her up. I said no, I was half asleep and had no idea what she was rambling on about. She didn't believe me and made me swear that I hadn't. I always played scary pranks with my family, so that's why. I swore I didn't and asked her what was up. My mom is a super light sleeper, and so while she was sleeping, she heard someone prop open her door. She looked up and saw the figure of a boy and thought it was me. She asked it, "What's wrong?" and blinked, but there was nothing there, and her door was still open. She called my name a few times and there was no response, hence why she came to my room. I have to admit, given the stuff happening with the doors, I was kind of scared, but I convinced my mom that she was imagining things, and so she went back to sleep. Ever since that night, and up to this day, my mom still sleeps with her door open and the living room light on, and I don't blame her after what happened next. 2 weeks after this incident occurred, my mom's best friend and her son and daughter, they were both around my age, came over from our homeland of Malaysia to visit us. I was really excited as I had always been close to them. One thing you should know about my aunt, she had many experiences growing up with the paranormal, and so she is super scared of ghosts. For this reason, me and her kids always used to play pranks on her. One day, the 4 of us were playing poker on the dining table while my mom was taking a nap in the living room. Suddenly, my mom rushes out of the living room. Her eyes were wide open and she looked really scared. She asked her who had woken her up from her nap. The 4 of us were dumbfounded, as we had all been playing cards the entire time. She then told us that she felt someone tap her shoulder while she was asleep. When she opened her eyes, there were 2 feet on the floor. Once again, she blinked, and the feet were gone and there was no one there. My mom was full on freaking out now, especially after what happened the other night. Then my aunt, given how afraid she is of ghosts, started to freak out too. I didn't want her holiday to be ruined, so I managed to convince them that my mom was probably in the middle of a dream, so when she woke up, she was probably hallucinating. Yes, I know it sounds stupid, but hey, it worked. But then the next day, something else happened. My mom had gone to the shops to get groceries. The kids and I were playing video games in the living room, while their mom was having a shower. Suddenly, we hear the bathroom door burst open, and out runs my aunt wrapped in her towel. She screamed at us, yelling, telling us to stop trying to scare her and that it wasn't funny. The three of us were super confused, and her daughter asked her what had happened. She told us that she knew that we were the ones knocking on the bathroom door, even after she told us to stop 3 times. I know it probably seemed like she was overreacting, but I cannot emphasize how scared she is of ghosts. I exchanged a concerned look with her kids, and then told her that it was genuinely not us, and that we were playing FIFA the entire time. Soon my mom got home and we told her what happened. My aunt started sleeping with her room lights on for the rest of the trip. Soon my aunt and her kids had gone home and it was back to me and my mom again. We were back to our regular routine. My mom was finally at peace and she had not seen anything for a while apart from the garage door opening on its own every once in a while. The same, however, could not be said of me. It seemed that it had come my turn to be tormented. As I mentioned before with my mom at work, I would be home alone for a few hours every day. I began to start hearing things. The strange thing is, it would never occur while I was in the living room. Whenever I went to use the toilet or went to sit in my room, I would start hearing things coming from the living room and the kitchen. It started out small, just the sound of some panting, like if you had run a marathon, that kind of panting, but the minute I entered the living room, nothing. There would be no sound at all. It soon started to get worse. I would hear footsteps pacing around outside my room, and spoons and pots falling in the kitchen. But every time I stepped out into the living room, the noises would stop, and everything would be just as I left it. There was even a time when I thought I heard a kid laughing right outside the door when I was in the toilet. I decided not to tell my mom yet, because she seemed to be getting over her experiences and I didn't want to scare her again. But one day I felt that I needed to tell her, and we decided that day it was the time we had contacted our priest to perform the prayers for our house. It was the day my best friend and his parents came over for dinner. It all started as an innocent dinner. My best friend and his family were Malaysian as well, and we were having a great time talking about our home and having a signature Malaysian meal. My friend's dad was telling us a story when all of a sudden his face just froze and his eyes widened. He honestly looked like he was having a stroke. His face contorted into a frown and he just stared down at the table. My mom and I shared a worrying look, but my friend and his mom just continued eating like nothing was happening. Suddenly his dad seemed to return to us, and he continued telling the story as if nothing happened. But he could see that my mom and I looked worried. Suddenly his wife tapped his shoulder and said, "Just tell them." He frowned at his wife and just kept eating. There was an awkward silence for a few minutes, and then he finally decided to address the elephant in the room. He apologized for scaring us and assured us that there was no need to worry. He then went on to tell us about his life. Since he was a child, he had been very religious, and from a young age, he felt a very close connection to God. He regularly meditated and was very, very spiritual. He was so spiritual that when he was in his mid-20s, he had awoken a gift. He was able to see dead people. I kid you not, when he said this, I immediately looked at my friend, waiting for him to start laughing at some prank. But my friend's face was dead serious, and he continued looking at his dad as he told his story. He told us that he could see them everywhere, when he was walking his dog on the street, when he was sitting in the park, in people's houses, and even sometimes sitting on people who had been possessed. He said the spirits were drawn to him because they knew he could see them, and they would stalk him, begging him to help them reach the afterlife. He said there was simply nothing he could do, because these people had died before their time, and they would simply have to wait on Earth until it was their time. Back home, he was regularly contacted by people having paranormal experiences to perform a cleansing to drive evil spirits away. He told us about some of those experiences, but I don't feel like it's my place to share them here. He then asked us something that gave me chills. Have you guys performed prayers for the house yet? My mom refused to answer the question until he told her why he asked that. He said that he did not want us to worry, and that if we hadn't, we probably should. My mom continued to ask him why until he finally conceded. This is what he said. Remember when I had that moment just now when I was talking? I had a visit. I won't tell you what it was, but it was the same spirit I saw standing at the front door when we came here. That's when my mom told him everything that had been happening. It was during this time that I decided to tell my mom about the things I had been hearing in the house. My friend's dad then told us that he didn't think it was a malicious spirit, but to be safe, it was time for us to conduct the prayers for the house. Before he left, he asked my mom if he could use our altar in the prayer room. My mom took him to it, and we all followed him. As he stood in front of the altar, his body suddenly shook, as if he just had a huge hiccup. He then put his hands together and bowed his head. Before leaving, he said, "I can see why the two of you have not been hurt. You are both protected." That concluded their visit. A week later, we arranged for a priest from our local temple to cleanse and bless our home. I promise you that ever since that day, nothing strange has ever happened in our house. Even the garage door has stopped opening on its own. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I have learned my lesson. I will never move into a new house without performing the rituals that my culture demands. Well, that's all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed listening to these stories, and if you want to hear more, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and stay spooky, everyone.